This is Join Us in France, episode 247. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is a podcast where you'll hear pragmatic advice for your next trip to France. Today, Elise and I chat about a place that you may have never heard of, Conques in Occitanie. There are places in France that are hidden in plain sight. Why? Because they are not in Paris. And today we bring you to Conques, a wonderful village in the southwest of France. It's squarely off the beaten track and totally gorgeous. Conques, the full name is Conques-en-Rouergue, is a really small village, full-time population around 300 people today. That was huge in the Middle Ages. It is in the Aveyron, a 45-minute drive from Rodez. It has a huge, beautiful abbey and a church that are a testament to its glorious past, when this was a major stop for pilgrims who came to worship the relic of Sainte Foy, Saint Faith in English. I have been there many times, although not as recently as Elise, who will be telling us a lot more about it. If you are interested in this episode, I recommend you also check out episode 245 about nearby Rodez and episode 143 about Figeac. Both are in the same gorgeous part of France, Occitanie, where I was born and raised and where I live today. We use a lot of French names on this podcast, and if you're not sure how to spell them, you'll find them all written out on the episode page at joinusinfrance.com/247, the number 247. All right, I'll share some important news after my conversation with Elise, but for now, let's chat about Conques. Bonjour, Elise.
Bonjour, Annie.
Well, we just recorded another episode. We're silly, aren't we?
We're cheating.
This is podcasting. It's okay. We do two in a row.
You know what that makes me think of this morning as I was getting ready to come here? I was thinking, gee, it's a podcast. I could come in my pajamas. Nobody would know.
Absolutely.
Except that if I got stopped on the road, I'd be in trouble. I could do this.
No, you're actually wearing a cute shirt that says what? It says wonderful. Yeah, it's a good shirt.
It's a wonderful shirt.
Yes, it's a wonderful shirt.
There you are.
And so last week we talked about Rodez. Yeah. I didn't forget already, which is in the Aveyron.
She's laughing because, well, never mind. It's an inside joke. Anyway.
And so Aveyron, Rodez, we finished on the aligot, which is, as my husband put it, what they eat in heaven. And so,
yeah, heaven where they don't weigh you afterwards, right?
Right.
Yeah.
This is the good kind of heaven.
This is a good kind
There's
of heaven.
There's no scales in that heaven.
No.
And so now we're going to talk about Conques, which is a much smaller place.
Oh, yes.
But a much more touristy place.
Much more touristy place.
Yes.
And it is a World UNESCO Heritage Site.
Well, there you go.
Okay. And it is also listed as, and genuinely deserves a listing as, one of the most beautiful villages in France. Okay, so it's.
Oh, is it also a village? Is it that small?
Oh yeah.
I haven't been in years. I don't remember.
It's just, well, everybody's taste is different. It's gorgeous, but it's very small.
Yeah.
Okay, so Conques is a village that is approximately 40 to 45 kilometers north of Rodez. Mm-hmm. So we're getting almost to the very northern edge of the department of Aveyron.
Okay.
And as I had mentioned when we talked about Rodez, Aveyron is a very big department, physically, very big department. So there are wonderful, gorgeous things, but they're very spread out, much more spread out than in some of the other departments that we've talked about. And Conques is famous and has been famous for a very, very long time.
Right.
And so the name, let's start with the name. The name comes from the word in Latin for conche, which means shell.
Shell, yeah.
And the simple reason is that because it's actually a small circus, geologically speaking, that is, there's a crossing of two small rivers, the Dourdou
Dourdou.
Dourdou.
Attends. Dourdou, tu vas falloir me l'épeler ça.
Dourdou.
D-O-U-R.
D-O-U.
D-O-U, Dourdou. Okay.
Right. And the ouch or ouch. I'm sorry. I think I'm getting slapped.
Ouch.
Ouch. O-U-C-H-E.
O-U-C-H-E. Louche.
Yeah. Ouch. Louche.
C'est louche.
C'est louche. Oh, God. Okay. We're both going to get a little batty here. Anyway, so there's actually a natural... As you get further north in the department of the Aveyron, the small rolling hills become a bit more dramatic.
Okay.
It's not steep mountains. We're not in steep mountain country. But you have more cliff-like formations. It's a little bit more rugged. Little rivers running everywhere, which is why it's a region that's actually quite green, even in the height of the summertime. And so it's a lot more dramatic. And starting in the very, very early Middle Ages, it became a region... and some other regions in France that had similar attributes, a region for hermits to go. When it was Christianized, at the very beginning of Christianity, there were lots of hermits. I don't know why, to be honest. I'm not sure. But it became something for somebody to do. I don't know if it was something that they did later on in life or there was a calling, but they would go off to these very secluded places. And so Conques is a place that has a documented history that goes back to about the year 500.
Yeah, it's pretty old.
It's pretty old.
Yeah.
It's pretty old. Now, what's interesting is that the son of Charlemagne, Louis the Pious, he actually gave money for the building of an abbey there. There had been hermits. The hermits turned it into what is known as a hermitage, which becomes basically a monastery. I mean, once you have a group of hermits, even if they're all sleeping in a hole in the cliff, when they get together to pray, you have a group, and then it becomes a monastery.
Yeah.
And so it was a monastery that was really in this, at the time, very secluded place, surrounded by forests with wolves and all this kind of stuff. And then in the late 700s, Louis the Pious actually gave money for the official creation of a Benedictine monastery there.
Okay.
So that is why it's a place that has had a very long documented history, which is kind of interesting.
Okay.
And then very soon after, and this is part of the essential history of Conques and why, in fact, to this day people go there, very soon after, starting in the 800s, it became a place that people stopped on the pilgrimage road to Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle.
Okay. That's what I knew it for.
Right. Now, for people who've never been to this part of France, even to this day, even though there are lovely little villages everywhere and lots of people go on vacation in this part of France, you can imagine what it must have been like when there were no real roads and it was very secluded because it's fairly rugged area, aside from the lovely little villages and all of that. But they're interspersed. I mean, they're not one on top of the other. Yeah. And you can just imagine, or I have tried to imagine, what it must have been like at a time when pilgrims to get there, it was a lot rougher than coming through to get to Toulouse, for instance, even at the same time period.
Right.
You really had to go through rough territory. You had to worry about dangers that were out there in the woods and things like that.
Colder too.
Yeah. So it was actually fairly important. And now, and this is also part of its history. And now this is where you have to take all of this with a certain grain of salt, as we say. I don't know the origins of that expression, but I'm going to try and do this straight face, but it may not work that way because this is very important because it has to do with really why people go there to this day.
Try me.
Okay. So the official opening as a Benedictine abbey was in the year 819.
Okay.
One of the things that happened in this part of the Middle Ages, and it lasted for 200-300 years, and that pretty much stopped, was that in order for a church, a monastery, or even a church in a small town to have money to subsist on, they had to get people to come to it because, of course, people would pray and leave some money. Now, one of the ways they managed to get people to come was if they had relics.
Sure.
Okay. Relics is a phenomenon that started happening around the year 600.
And it was huge.
Yeah. And it was conjoined with the idea of the chemin de Compostelle, of the pilgrimage road. You went to different stops because there was a relic there that you wanted to pray to.
Right.
Okay. All right.
And each place was supposed to be able to help you with different ailments. You could pray for different miracles, different this and that. Yeah.
So, once upon a time in the 800s, in this monastery in Conques, she's going to keep nodding her head, there was a monk named Ariviscus.
Ariviscus.
Ariviscus. Ariviscus. Right. That's more Latin.
Well.
And Mr. Ariviscus, who was a Benedictine monk.
Yes.
He originally was at the monastery in Conques.
Right.
Conques is very remote. It didn't have a lot of very important relics.
Okay.
So, Mr. Ariviscus went to a monastery in the town of Agen.
Agen, yes.
There's a monastery there called Sainte Foy d'Agen.
Okay.
Another Benedictine monastery.
Yeah.
And in this monastery...
Did he steal something?
You're getting ahead of me. Okay. In this monastery, there was a very, very, very important relic of a young martyr, a young girl who had been martyred at the age of 12. I'm not sure when, apparently under the Romans. Her name is Sainte Foy.
Sainte Foy.
Sainte Foy.
F-O-Y.
F-O-Y. F-O-Y.
Okay.
And it was a very important relic because it was really her whole body that was there.
Yeah, that is unusual.
Okay.
They normally only had like a finger or something.
With her head. Okay.
With her head in it.
With her head.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And so Mr. Ariviscus went there, spent 10 years there. This is at a time when 10 years is a long time, really.
Yeah.
But he went there with a specific intention of doing what is called a translation furtive. I just looked this up. In the Catholic Church.
Translation furtive.
Oui. A translation furtive is the moving of a relic from one monastery
to another.
And so
I was right. He stole it.
So one day, Mr. Ariviscus took Sainte Foy.
The whole thing?
No, he took her head.
Oh my goodness.
No, yes, he took her whole body. No, actually, he took the whole thing.
He took the whole thing?
He took the whole thing.
That's, I mean.
Okay. And he took it back to Conques.
How did this happen? Like, did he put her in a backpack or?
Probably on a donkey's back. But Agen is not close to Conques. It's a good, probably 2 days by a mule.
So he probably took because the relics were displayed in a beautiful box.
Well, yes. I mean, it wasn't a box.
He probably just took the box.
He took the box. So this is what happens, okay? So it turns out that when you do this, you don't get punished.
Is that right?
Yeah. No, I looked this all up. I mean, there's really this concept called translation furtive. Okay. So what happened was he took it to Conques. They put her in a new chassis. They made a beautiful new
a chassis
for a reliquary box. And they made what is called, and this is what, of course, is still there, which is actually really mind-blowing to see. They made what is called a majesty. They made a reliquary box by constructing something to house her skull.
Oh, now the skull is off.
Yeah, it's separate.
Okay.
And the skull is inside a wooden form.
Yeah.
It's actually been carved out to house the skull. And this particular Majesté was put on display in Conques. And I've seen it. I mean, I've been to Conques maybe 5 times or something like that.
Okay.
Of course, at the time, it was on display in the church. Now it's on display behind a big glass case in a room that's off to the side, which is called the treasury. I mean, you have to go in and see it there. But it's covered with gold and precious stones. And the eyes, it's a face. I mean, it's a whole face. And the eyes are made out of blue enamel. Don't look at me like that. The eyes are made out of blue enamel.
They put eyes in there?
And it's about... It's about that big. It's about a foot and a half. Yeah, something like that. I would say it's about this, if I remember correctly. It's not bigger than
30
that.
30 centimeters.
And it's and once she was there in this majesty.
Yeah.
They started having miracles.
Oh.
And people who were blind, who were coming there, regained their sight.
Wow.
And this is one of the miracles that became important. Each site that had miracles.
Yeah, that would be a good one.
It depends on what kind of miracle it is. In this case, it was bringing people's sight back. Okay,
that's a good one. That's a big one.
Because at the time, you could touch her. You could touch it.
That's why it doesn't work anymore.
No, it doesn't work anymore.
Because you can't touch her now.
No, you can't touch her anymore. Yeah.
Oh, dang it.
Okay, so she was on display. And because of that, more and more and more people started coming to Conques.
Well, I bet if she could cure blindness, because that's a pretty common problem for people, especially as they age.
Yeah. So thanks to the success of this, in the 1000s, they started the building of a new church because it had really just been a small church connected to the monastery. Okay, and the church that is there now was actually begun at the end of the 1000s.
Wow, so that's old.
It's really old.
Very old.
So what is so special about this church besides the fact that you can actually go and still see this relic? The church has one of the most gorgeous entranceways of all medieval churches anywhere in France.
Wow. So it must be it's not a Gothic church.
It's Romanesque.
Okay, yeah.
It's Romanesque. And if you've been to the Architecture Museum in Paris, you see a perfect reproduction of it. It has a tympanum. Now, the tympanum is the semicircular relief sculpture above the entranceway. And the one in Conques is mind-blowing. I love it. Why? Because it is still the original. It is still covered with a lot of color. So you can still see a lot of the original color, believe it or not. It's faded, of course. And it's a scene of the Last Judgment. And it's huge. It's about, 6 meters wide or something like that. It's huge. And it's designed in 3 layers, 3 layers going up. And it is one of the most beautifully carved graphic examples of what happens to you if you go to hell and what happens to you if you go to heaven. And it is fabulous to look at. And it is considered to be a jewel of Romanesque sculpture. It is the church itself is very beautiful and is famous for something else, which I'll mention in a second. But it's also very odd because the church, because it was part of this monastery, was built up against the hill. So rather than being typical, like most churches, in a Latin cross form where the transept, the long nave part, is the nave is long and the transept, the part that makes the cross, is shorter. In this case, the transept is longer than the nave.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like an equidistant cross.
Okay.
Because they had built it this way when it was a smaller church, and they wanted to rebuild the new church on top of that one.
Oh, so they just added on to it.
So they just redid it there. So it's made of this absolutely gorgeous sandstone, and it has slate. This is an area where the roofs are slate.
Yes.
And the village grew up around the monastery. So this is, there are, generally speaking, in the Middle Ages, it's either village first or church first. In this case, it was church first. So the village, which is still not very big, is gorgeous. It's, of course, very well maintained now because it is one of the most beautiful villages in France. So the houses are all in excellent condition. They're all from the Middle Ages or up through the end of the Renaissance. Flowers everywhere. It's very steep. It's not very big unless you go to the outlying areas, but it has...
So steep, you mean you park at the bottom and then you have to walk up?
No, actually, if I remember correctly, there's a parking area at the entrance to the village before you get to... there's a magnificent media tech and art center there as well, and it's kind of just before you get to the church. So you can drive that far up, but that parking area fills up fairly quickly in the summer. And otherwise, if you can't get to park there, you have to be careful because if you get that far and you haven't parked on the windy road going up where there's legitimate parking all the way, you have to go all the way back down and come all the way back up again. In other words, you go through one narrow road on the village and then you go all the way back down to the bottom of the valley and then you come all the way back up again. So there's a lot of people who wind up having to park along the road as you go up into the village. but the tympanum is, in terms of Romanesque sculpture and architecture, it's fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. Now, of course, nobody knows who did it. This is not an example of signed art in any case.
Year 1000, that's,
It's pretty. But it's fabulous because it's how they managed to keep it from losing all its color. I don't know. And it's in perfect condition. I mean, it's just, it has. And then when you go into the church, now this is a source of great polemic. You have both some of the church was heavily vandalized during the French Revolution. The monastery was largely a good part of it was destroyed, and a lot of the windows were destroyed. The fact that the reliquary boxes were protected is already something, that they were not taken and melted down, just as a lot of things were done in the Revolution, but. A lot of the stained glass windows were, of course, destroyed. And so here we come back to our wonderful painter, Soulages.
Oh, yes.
Who, it turns out...
That we talked about in the previous episode.
Who we talked about in about the episode about Rodez and the Soulages Museum. Now, it turns out that Soulages has said that one of the reasons that he was inspired as a young person, because he was very young when he started studying art, it was like 13 or 14, was that his family had taken him to Conques. And he had seen the site and the quietude of it. The idea of this kind of hermitage monastery filled him with some kind of awe. And he said it inspired him by looking at everything around there to do art, which I find very interesting and moving as a story.
Yeah.
So in the beginning of the 1980s, when they were doing some restoration work for the church, he was asked... or he volunteered, I don't know which, to be honest, to do the windows for the church.
Stained glass.
The stained glass windows. However, this is Mr. Soulages, whose work is largely monochrome, and who, of course, in his second half of his career, concentrated on either things with black or things with blue. Those are the two dominant colors that he's used. And so they gave him carte blanche to do these windows.
Yeah.
And so what he did was he worked with a glassmaker. And if you're stopping in Rodez before you go to Conques and you go to the Soulages Museum, there's a video where you see him working with the glassmakers, testing all kinds of glass that was fabricated just for this, of different translucid pieces of glass that are not in color, but in shades of gray. So... and they have kind of streaks of lines. So it's kind of waves. It looks like waves on the ocean.
So they use modern glass techniques.
And not bright color at all.
Right.
And so the windows in the church are Soulages windows. And
all of them?
All of them.
Wow.
All of them, except I think there are two in the back.
So is it very dark in this church?
No, because it's like from almost white to medium grays, graduated in the same window. And the windows are positioned, I don't know if they're all south, but he specifically designed it so that with the light coming in at different times of the day, the windows change color a little bit, but they give off an enormous amount of light. They're actually the opposite of a dark colored glass window.
Okay.
But a lot of people hate it because it's not lots of bright pieces of colored glass and no figures. It's very abstract. So the church is famous now for the tympanum, for this
the Soulages glass,
and for the fabulous relic of Sainte Foy, which is still there.
But can you see the eyes?
Well, they're just enamel. They're just painted enamel. They're not real.
Oh, they're just painted.
They're painted.
So they have this skull.
The skull is inside a wooden. It's like they carved out a piece of wood.
Yeah.
To put the skull inside of. The skull's very small. She was 12 years old.
Yeah.
So basically, what you have is the support around the skull. You don't see the skull at all.
Okay.
You don't see anything except the gold and the stones and all of that.
Okay.
But what they did was, like, the Romans used to do that too. They when they carved statues, they would take pieces of colored stone to make the eyes. So it's very startling because they kind of stare out at you. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, no, it's just, you don't see anything other than the glitter and the glitz.
I'm going to have to go see this because I don't remember seeing. I remember going to Conques. I even remember the church.
Yeah.
But I don't remember seeing the Sainte Foy relic.
Oh, if you go there, I mean, I suppose you can go there and not go see the relic, but it would be kind of crazy not to go see it because it's really one of the reasons that Conques became so important. You know?
Yeah.
So, of course, it was pillaged during the Revolution. And then basically it went back to being this kind of little backwater place with a monastery that had just a few monks. There were no longer Benedictine monks. That those disappeared quite a way after that. And Prosper de Mérimée was again responsible for saving it.
Prosper Mérimée, who saw the value of this old
the
church.
Architecture, the value of it from a historical point of view, and it was reopened basically and reconstructed to make it sound in 1873. So it's already 150 years ago that it came back to life, basically.
Yeah.
And it started becoming important again when people started going back on the road to Compostelle. And then, of course, later on in the 20th century, with people having more and more cars and wanting to see historical places, because the beauty of the site is incredible. The village is gorgeous. It's very small, but it's really gorgeous. The site is spectacular. It's not spectacular the way Rocamadour is, but it's just really gorgeous there. Down below, you have a Roman bridge on the Dourdou. A very beautiful old stone Roman bridge and another little part of the village all the way down below. And so it came back to life, and it was therefore nominated and became part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site.
So there's UNESCO World Heritage and Plus Beau Village de France.
And Plus de Village. And they now have a huge art center and where they have music, conferences. So it's very lively, and it's lively all year round. And in the summer, there are still a fair number of pilgrims who come through there. And having never been a pilgrim, but having seen various stops along the way, this is an arduous one. This is not an easy one to do. You got to go up, and then you got to go down. And
then back up,
and then back up, and it's really not. It's far, but it's absolutely gorgeous, and it really helps give you an idea of what this part of France is like. The stone houses that are beautiful hues of kind of pinks and purples and red browns, and the slate roofs, which are very, very steep because there's a lot of rain in this area and in the wintertime. Little narrow valleys with these tiny little rivers going through. It's charming. It's absolutely charming.
Every time you talk about these places, I just want to go right away.
But I'm doing a good job.
You're doing a good job.
The tourist office should hire me, I guess.
Well, actually, listeners should hire you.
That's true.
Take them to.
That is absolutely true. They certainly should.
You're very interesting.
And then there we are. And then it's a magical little area. Now, of course, I know a lot of people go to see these things, and there's a certain amount of whatever. The whole idea of these reliquary boxes and everything is kind of strange, but it's part of the history.
Yeah,
it's just part of the history. It's just part of the whole deal. I just find it incredible that there's actually a term for this idea of a monk going from one monastery. And then what I was reading again this morning was that it was common practice. If you could get it, take it.
Yeah, well, basically. I know that there was a huge business of monasteries and churches exchanging or buying relics from one another.
Right.
So why not? I mean, there had to be all sorts of ways. It was a major, major activity. And people really found a lot of solace in visiting those churches to hopefully be cured of blindness. I mean, imagine, that's like a life-changing thing if it really happens. I mean, and
especially we're talking about times when there was no such thing as medicine in terms that we know it today.
Right.
I mean,
it's not like
people got bled. I mean, they maybe had herbal solutions to put on people's eyes if they didn't have a serious case of whatever.
Yeah. No, that's what they knew. That's what they had to fall back on. And, and it's funny because in France, we're a very secular country. Very few people in France go to church these days. But we have a lot of, most of us anyway, have a lot of respect for these old churches and these old stories.
Yes.
And, I don't believe in any of it, but But I think it's cool that we have them. Like, it's like interesting.
It's very interesting. Can I just add a couple of things about the tympanum? Because I see that.
Of course.
I love this tympanum. It's a strange word, I know, but it's the first time I went there, I just I think I stayed without moving for half an hour just looking at it because I could not believe how beautifully it was carved. The colors are yellows and reds and a little bit of blue and green. Now they're not bright anymore, but you can still see that everything was painted. You have 124 people carved into this space, which of course includes the devil down below. The devil was always on the left side.
Sure.
The left side is the devil's side, I guess that's why I'm left-handed. Sinister, right? And you have one of the devil's assistants. The devil's face is there, and you have one of the devil's assistants with his finger pointing on is weighing on the scale, cheating, to make sure that that's a soul that goes to them, it doesn't go up. And you can see the flames, you can see the flames coming out, and the faces on them, and they're all waiting there, And then on the other side, you have all these people who are very calmly waiting to go up to heaven with their books open, the book of life, like, I was a good girl. I was a good boy. I will go to heaven, and then they go up. It's kind of nice, I guess, but a little bit boring, but whatever. And then you have the wise men, and the city. And then, of course, what would happen is that at the time that the things were carved, you would have had the king represented, the bishop represented, all these people. Now, whether they were represented realistically, who knows? We have no idea anymore. But they included all of these people, not just the clergy, not just the angels and everything. And then, of course, you have Christ in a what's called a mandorle, which is top, which is in this beautiful sort of tear-shaped almost thing, and then the angels with their trumpets going up. And
I hope I find a picture of that to put on the website.
There are lots of pictures actually. And then of course he's got his right hand up with the two fingers up. Growing up in a time when there was like lots of hippies. I always thought we invented the two-finger thing, but it was no, it was not. It wasn't even John Lennon. It wasn't. It goes back that far. It's really beautiful. Mm-hmm. And there are a couple of charming little hotels there. Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of little restaurants, a couple of snack places. It's really. They even have Airbnb little places you can rent. It's a nice place if you want to be in a place that's relatively quiet, even though there are lots of people that come through during the day.
Right, but at night it probably comes
right down. At night, absolutely not. And they've had a bunch of really interesting conferences connecting cinema to music to religion in this art center that developed there that is relatively recent, but is apparently doing very, very well.
But how long do you need to visit Conques? You probably need a half a day, right?
A half a day.
Yeah.
I don't think you need more than that.
Right.
Some people will go through quicker. They'll just walk through.
Would it be a good place to base yourself out of to see the rest of the region, or not?
If you want to do the northern part, I honestly think that it's really the extreme northern part of Aveyron.
Yeah.
From there, you can literally go into the Cantal, which is already a whole other story. You can go to the east into Aubrac. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a little bit too remote, I think, to unless you want to stay, like there are a couple of villages along the way, if you're coming up from Rodez, for instance, that are down below in the valley, probably a little bit more practical in terms of where to stay, because they're gorgeous. They're not that famous, but they're just as gorgeous anyway. And it's a lot easier because most of the roads are down below in the valley, that go through. I would say it's almost easier to stay not that far from a place like Rodez or something like that, because if you want to eventually go towards the south, towards Millau, towards the coast of Larzac or anything like that, you need to be in a place where there are bigger roads. Yeah. But if you want to explore further into the real, more remote countryside
of France,
France, you can stay in this area, but you need to stay close. I'm not sure exactly how the routes work, but you probably need to stay closer to a vector where you can get further east or more easily further west. Because if you go further west, what's weird is that you eventually come to the northern part of the Gorge de l'Aveyron and Najac, which takes you can always go hook around almost in a big circle and come all the way back down to Abbey and Toulouse that way.
Okay.
And that part is a lot easier to get around in. This is getting into fairly remote, small roads.
Right. It only has small roads.
It only
there's
has
no
small
freeways.
roads.
There's
no.
Yeah.
There's a very beautiful village. It's bigger. I mean, Conques is really small, but it's further east. It's called Espalion. And it's famous. It's got a beautiful medieval center and a big bridge that covers the river there. And there's others. There's Estang, which is further south. I mean, but they're
Estang, Estaing. Okay.
Yeah, but they're fairly spread out. But what's interesting is that if you drive in this area, you might discover a little village that's really beautiful, that's just not famous. You know, everything's beautiful and made with this sandstone and these slate roofs and very well preserved or very well renovated.
Yeah.
There are little places to stay and eat pretty much everywhere. You know, so
and then of course Logis de France is always a good option if you have them.
Logis de France is a wonderful option. It's a wonderful option, and there's always, it seems like in this kind of area, if a town has enough people to maintain any kind of commerce, it has some kind of tiny little restaurant, maybe some tiny little hotel. So it's quaint in that way, you know, and it's really, relatively speaking, compared to some other areas, you know, Provence, Dordogne and everything, it's really much more off the beaten track.
Oh yeah, it's much,
I mean, you know, just, you don't go through this area unless you really want to go through this area.
Yeah.
But it's very beautiful. It really is, yeah.
Okay, more places I gotta go see.
More places to see in France,
well,
ladies and gentlemen.
I think I have been. I'm sure I have been there, probably more than once. But I didn't go with a camera. That's my problem.
Yeah.
If I don't go with a camera, then I don't necessarily remember. When I see a photo, I'm like, oh, yes, right. I've seen this.
Now, just as a caveat, I'm not sure exactly.
Caveat.
July and August, there are busloads of people who show up during the day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's famous. I mean, this is a World UNESCO Heritage Site, and it is a really beautiful place. So, you know, you can... I mean, I've been there alone and I've been there with groups. And so that's just to let people know. I mean, it's, you know.
Yeah. So like most of these types of places, if that get a lot of bus tours, then it's best to, if you want to enjoy it when it's quiet, it's best to sleep there.
Yes.
So that you arrive around 3-4 p.m., which is when the tour buses go. Typically, because if they need to get back to Montpellier or Toulouse, it will take them 3 hours or so.
Exactly.
So they're going to be leaving, because the bus drivers, they don't want to be driving till midnight, right?
No.
So
not on those roads.
No. So they're going to be out of there by 3 or 4, possibly 5 p.m.
Right.
So if you arrive in the middle of the afternoon, you settle into your hotel, and you can enjoy it for the evening and then move on the next day. That's probably the best way to do this.
Or get there very early in the morning.
Right, or get there
really early in the morning. Because I think most of these places, the churches still close at 6 or 7 in the summer, maybe at the latest.
Yeah. But it's hard to beat the tour buses.
It's hard to beat them.
Because some of these tour operators, they'll wake their people up at 6 in the morning.
Yeah. No, it's true. But you're right. It's basically the first half of the day, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
They're pretty much gone. But it's whatever. It's still nice.
And this is true of all these places that are really quaint and beautiful. Anywhere in France, you know, stay the night, and then you have the place to yourself overnight.
Yep.
And over the late afternoon, evening, next morning, it's going to be pretty much empty.
This is a place where, unless it's cloudy, you're going to see zillions of stars at night. I mean, it's really far from the city.
Yeah.
And quiet.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, see, that's why we've been talking 37 minutes. So that's why we couldn't do both of them at the same time. We just like to talk, Elise. That's just.
Is that what it is? Really?
But you should write books about these places.
I should.
Or at least like little travel guides that people can buy from you and take with them when they go visit.
My favorite places to visit.
Right. That would be awesome. I'd be buying them. Because you tell me all these things and even I forget. Like, I'm going to be going to Valls because I have family visiting. Yeah. I'm going to go visit some of the.
Good.
I'm going to do some of the day trips that you've recommended because we have family coming this summer and they haven't seen these places.
That'll be cool.
Yeah, but even I would benefit from having something written down to remind myself when I get there. So
Okay, I will do it.
Working.
Okay.
Thank you, Elise.
You're welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you, Denise M. Joshek, Stephanie Tav, and Kevin Buck for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. And thank you, Gabrielle Cohen, for editing your pledge up. Patrons enjoy several rewards, including membership into a secret Facebook group where I can answer your questions every day. They can also hire me to be their trip consultant and help them work out any detail they want help with. Visit patreon.com/join us to see the different reward tiers, and thank you so much for giving back. I will release some Patreon extras from Paris next week, so look out for those, patrons. For my personal update this week, I am going to Paris to spend a week there to finish up my Montmartre audio tour that I'll be releasing before the end of September 2019. It will be available through the Voice Map app on your smartphone. This will be my third Voice Map audio tour for Paris. With these tours, I take you to all the wonderful places in Paris, of course. I take you to the big hits that everybody wants to see, but also to the things that you missed last time. One of those tours takes 1 to 2 hours. The app shows you where the meeting point is, and then when you get there, I start telling you about it. I work very hard to hit the right mixture of cultural interest, quirky things, French history, literature and movies, the history of France, the history of science, recommendations for places that we walk right past that I think are fabulous. And, it's just a mixture that ends up being interesting to most people. And I bring my French point of view to it, of course, because, I love France and I want you to love it too. Podcast listeners get a discount when they buy on joinusinfrance.com audio tours, but you can buy directly from the Voice Map app on your smartphone. And you'll soon be able to buy them through TripAdvisor and other big travel aggregators like that. Audio is all the rage these days, and people love the freedom that the Voice Map app gives them because they can go whenever they want, stop, start, try it again, whatever. When you get to the end of one of my tours, you will get prompted to write a review. Please do it. Just 1 or 2 sentences is all you need to write. Nothing earth-shattering, just whatever pops into your mind at the end of this tour. These tours are new, so getting a few reviews will make a huge difference. Now, the other big news. Those of you who are subscribed to the podcast will be getting a new type of episode to the Join Us in France lineup and feed. These will be short episodes under 5 minutes where I answer one question that keeps coming up on the Facebook group. This one that will come out next Sunday will answer the question, Versailles, yes or no? And the answer, of course, is it depends. I don't want to write 2 pages of, comments on Facebook that, hardly anybody's going to read because Facebook buries stuff within minutes. So I'll just do short episodes to answer these types of questions that are perennial questions that come up all the time. So next week, the short episode will replace the normal full episode because I'll be in Paris and I won't have time to do all of that. But going forward, these shorts will be in addition to the normal lineup. So if you're subscribed, they'll just appear in your podcasting app, which is the way it should be. I will continue to release a normal full episode on Sunday. I'm not sure when these shorts will come out. It won't be every week. It'll depend on the questions that are interesting on Facebook. And I will keep them under 5 minutes. So it's a complete answer, but it's not a big time commitment to listen. There are a lot of people who join the Facebook group who don't listen to the podcast. About half of them, I would venture to say, maybe more than half of them. So I'm hoping that these short episodes will be a good entry point for them into the wonderful world of learning about France through your ears and podcast listening in general. These shorts will also be really handy when I'm too busy to release a full episode because I'm away working on a tour or because I'm taking a break. So one coming up next week, and then after that, you'll find them occasionally. If you want to recommend the podcast to someone who already listens to podcasts, tell them they can find the Join Us in France travel podcast anywhere they get their podcasts. If they listen to music but not podcasts on their phones, tell them to search for Join Us in France on Spotify or Pandora. And if they don't normally listen to anything on their phones or podcasts or anything else, send them to joinusinfrance.com, and thank you for listening and spreading the word. Send questions or feedback to Annie at joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of trip planning, and I will talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.